Invisible Women. Like, neither of us has got the book in front of us. I lent mine to my brother.
I,
Have you got it? Yeah.
yeah, I'm still like, there's still like this much left to read, but most of it is
This is good. What page are you on? Which?
like 265. But actually, most of what's left is just
It's the references, right?
references. I only have like this much to read, so it's
That's
not
not bad.
yeah.
I really liked the amount of information regarding research-backed information. So whenever there was, even though the references is quite a lot, it makes you think you've got so much more of the book left. But I really, really liked the way she proved examples in some of the things that were real life. What did you think generally about it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think so often when people are discussing like these topics, people are willing to kind of like dismiss it because they think that the data isn't there to back it up. And to be fair, it's kind of like the point of the book, in that there isn't actually that much data. But where there are studies, I don't know, being able to find all of the information. And I think, I don't know, the thing that really got me about the book was that it just covered every single aspect of life. And there are certain things, certain examples where you think, well, okay, that's like a mild inconvenience, but it's not really the end of the world. And I kind of thought, well, people, you know, even if people do read this, they won't really think it's that much of a big deal. They won't bother trying to change anything. But then you get other examples that are much more serious, like particularly the sections that are sort of more like medically focused. And you think, yeah, like I think I just finished reading the section that's like about kind of like healthcare and all the tests that are done on different medicines. And just like my mind is just blown. Like every time you turn a page, there's just another fact. And I actually found it quite difficult to sit down and read large chunks of this book. Although it is so well written, it makes you want to keep turning the page. I found it just like infuriating reading it. And I found that I needed, after reading the chapter, I'm like, I've got to put it down, I've got to like calm down. Just so like enraging, like how
I know. I was exactly the same, which is so good that you felt the same way, because I had to pick up another book. So I was reading 2 books simultaneously because I was like, look, I want to keep reading, but this is so infuriating. This is actually draining because I'm taking in all of this. It's like a heaviness. Like you can feel the annoyance, the irritation, the fact that I definitely resonated with that medical information, where for those of you who haven't read it, they talk about how studies are mostly done on men, and most females don't actually come into the studies for trials, and then if they do, they're kind of generalized. And even that alone just makes you think, well, that in itself is such a huge bias that we're not getting this information that is relevant to women. So when medical professions hand out these drugs, well, actually, it's not suitable for the female body, for her hormones and when she should take them. And there's so much emphasis on coaching and the female cycle and menstruation, because we know that you have a higher, you have more red blood cells in your body when it comes to menstruation, but actually that is helpful when it comes to exercise. But nobody really tagged onto this and say, actually, it's a win. But do this if you can tolerate it, because a lot of women can't exercise when they have their period. But then there's going to be different effects for when male take medication and a female takes that medication. It was mind-blowing to think that we're taking something without understanding what it can actually do to our body. And it actually made me think, I don't want to take this medication anymore. Like, how can I prevent myself from taking it, because I don't know what's happening to my body? And I was the same with you, so infuriated that I was like, I need to put this down, but I still want to read, so let me just pick up a light-hearted book.
I did exactly the same thing. Yeah, you kind of need, as you say, a break from that like heaviness of it, of the fact that parts of it, it makes you want to like make a change and say, well, this isn't right, this isn't how society should be, I want to try and change this. And then there are parts in the book where there are people trying to change this, but then they're just met with like brick walls that are put up in front of them, because you know, the people with all the power, basically, they don't care enough, they don't see it as an issue, they don't want to make any changes. And I think that is then like another level of just like, is this going to change? Is any of this going to change?
And I think that this is the thing. I wrote, there's a post actually I've just put on Fitness Chicks, and it talks about how females are putting in positions, and if when they're in those positions, they're going to attract more female talent, and then they're going to have these types of conversations that enhance that culture. And then you're bringing more and more intelligence to these types of conversations, which actually, from what you said, it made me realize that story when a female CEO was pregnant and she found it difficult to walk from her car to the office. And she didn't even realize how difficult it was. And she realized that you need more disabled spots, and you need, family spots in case they are pregnant. And only when she was going through it did she make a change to her culture in her office. And I just thought that even then, she's a woman, but she didn't go through it. Well, sorry, she's a woman and she went through it to make a change. So she didn't think of it thinking, oh, I need to make this change anyway. It only happened because she had to walk in those shoes. And it really does baffle me that we say, okay, so if a female in that position can change things, unless she experiences it, will it actually change? So you can't automatically assume a female's perspective will be the one that is needed. It's a person who's been through that situation, that hardship, and that experience that can make a change, because they feel so hard done by because of it.
And I think as well, in senior positions, in this case in companies, you have so many men in senior positions that you do have that range of experiences, because there are so many men there. But if you just have a handful of women, you're not getting that same range of experience. And so, as you say, you can't have them sort of accounting for all the different things that women experience. I think the thing that really hit me was like particularly like the opening chapters that was talking about how men are like seen as the default, like the standard, the norm, and how women are seen as like niche or other. And I don't know, just seeing it like written that way, it's like, it's kind of like how I feel that women have been treated like the whole time, but actually it's completely ridiculous. Like, women make up like half the population. Yeah. There are just as many women as there are men. Why is it seen that women shouldn't be accounted for because they are, different and they aren't the norm? Mm-hmm. And like what we were saying before about the medical industry, men, their bodies are seen as the norm because they don't have the same hormones that women have that affect us differently throughout the cycle. And actually, 50% of the population do have those hormones that do vary throughout the month. So why are you discounting them because they're too difficult? That it's, you could argue that women are the norm and that men aren't the norm because they don't have those hormones. It's just, I don't know.
It's a different perspective, isn't it? And that I found that thing. It's like, why are we being cast aside? Because actually, even though we're not in those prominent positions, it feels like there aren't women speaking up about it. So a really good story, actually. My mum will probably hate this, but she says, how when a female does something in the house and she just gets on with it and she does it, and she does it to her very best standard. But if a male does it, they'll be like, well, I did this and I cooked and I cleaned and look how clean it is. This is amazing. And then they'll go tell their friends of saying, oh, I cooked, I helped, I helped clean around the house. And they're like, oh, you've got a great husband there, right? But it's like, but I'm not saying that I've cooked and cleaned and I've done it to a high standard. It's like, we're not hyping ourselves up enough or even at all. And then when men do it, it's that confidence, and then people then think, oh, that's unusual, oh, that's brilliant that your husband gets to do that. It's like when women are shocked that men are taking care of their babies, it's like, yeah, it's their children. Don't praise them because they've looked after them for an afternoon. Oh, great, what a great dad he is. It's like, yeah, that's his kid.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think, that kind of like ties into the topic of like unpaid work that's brought up a lot throughout the book. And I'd never really thought of housework or childcare as unpaid work, but it makes total sense, because if you were to get someone outside your family to do that work, you would pay them for it. But as soon as that work is done by a family member, it's not paid, and it almost always falls to the woman in the family. And to hear the kind of statistics about the number of hours that women spend doing this every day and every week, it's, I don't know, it's kind of no surprise that when a family does have children, or a couple have children, that it's then the woman who ends up not working, because if she's already expected to do a lot of those extra hours of unpaid work, it's so much more difficult to try and keep a job whilst doing all of that stuff at the same time. It's it's
also that compromise, isn't it? It's saying that your hourly rate or your overall wage is a lot lower, and they're always going to go to the family member who does have a higher wage, and because it does normally fall to the male who does have a higher salary, well, you're going to rely on that more. And just as you said, I think it's that type of compassion that women have as well, as they want to then not want to, but also it's kind of this responsibility that they need to take care of their elders, or they feel more compassion to do it. And it does fall on them because of the cultural norms, and we're not challenging those cultural norms. And I feel like if our children or their children can change it, then society begins to shift. But it won't happen overnight, and it won't happen with one generation. It's going to happen because we've decided, and we're becoming aware that these social norms aren't justifiable anymore. They're just not right? Because until we step up to it, or we keep doing it, well, nothing's going to change.
It's so true, so true. I think it's kind of like a cycle that just kind of like perpetuates itself, really, in that society's set up in a certain way, and so people behave according to those societal norms, and it kind of just keeps going round and round in circles for generations. And it is the kind of thing that isn't, as you say, isn't going to change overnight, but it kind of needs to change. And I think a lot of the issue is kind of imposed from the people in power, but actually it's kind of beneficial to any country in terms of GDP, which is what politicians usually care about quite a lot. Is it's beneficial to have more women back in work. The way that society's set up is that once a woman has kids, quite often she won't go back to work, or maybe will only take on part-time work because she's required to look after the children and do all the cooking and the cleaning and everything else. That the way that society's set up is not actually beneficial to society. It seems a bit ridiculous, really.
I think sometimes, like when you thought this the same way as I did, as it was infuriating to see how unjust certain things are, and how complex the actual intricacies of all society and the way it's been, built on its foundation. It's almost like we need to rip it all out, chuck it in the bin, and start again. Because it's just as you said, is if people are going home and they have to look after their children, it does start with work, it does start with the government, and it does start with how we're educating the children. If in that book, she speaks about when children are asked, well, what do you think that this role is, like a scientist or a lecturer or a teacher, or, you know, a homemaker. Everybody has this biased gender roles that they're coming up with. We need to teach those children, but also society needs to stop typing, oh, she's a female coach. Well, why did you just describe her as a female coach when a coach is male? Like, how is that branding already there that you have to say, oh, so she's a female lecturer? Wait a second, let's stop doing that. Let's educate our children that they shouldn't have that bias, but also being aware that this is going on. It's almost like racism. If somebody is racist, do we continue to let them be racist, or do we call them out and say, well, this is not acceptable? What do you think about it?
Yeah, that's so true. I think, as you say, it's kind of so ingrained into society that people kind of say those things without even thinking about it. So like the flip side, you could say like a male nurse, you know, like certain roles are sort of stereotyped to be one gender. But I think, yeah, it kind of takes someone to stand up and say, actually, they're just a nurse.
Yeah.
Their gender is irrelevant in this situation.
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of, I don't know, as you say, it takes people to like speak up about it and say something, get people to change their attitudes a bit more. And then I think as well, having more people a bigger diversity of different people in different roles, it will then kind of break down that stereotype of you can only do this job if you're a certain gender. And as soon as you have then more role models, that then encourages younger people to aspire to certain careers. I think that's something that I've been really aware of as an engineer, is that there aren't actually that many other women in the same department as me at work, and just, you know, even at uni there weren't really that many other women on my course. And so it's quite important to me to try and kind of like encourage young girls into STEM, because there weren't really that many role models for me when I was younger. And so I think it's the kind of thing that, yeah, kind of generation by generation, just got to keep building on and try and keep improving.
I love that. You're definitely correct in terms of those types of role models. Like, look at just what's happened in America. In the United States, they've actually got their first vice president, Kamala Harris, and the fact that she's now able to be a role model to all these young women, just to say, well, you can get here. And you look at the history of all the vice presidents, and she's the only one. And it's like, yeah, it is systematic racism when that's all you've got as a demonstration of this is how it should be, or this is the way it was. But how can we change that as a society? How can we lift each other up? And even in areas that have been hard done by and have been deprived, or don't have the same level of housing or education or support into those specific careers, because it is difficult if they haven't had equal footing to get into those career roles. And I feel like if that can then be supported, more and more people can have a step up and go towards those types of careers and be a representative in that area.
Very much so. Yeah, I think it kind of takes two things. Firstly, having something for kids to aspire to. So seeing other people like them in a role that they would want to do is something that they can then aspire to. It's much more difficult to aspire to something if you can't actually see it, you know, there already happening. And then, as you say, the next step is to actually put something in place that makes it much more easier for those kids to get into those positions. As you say, like Kamala Harris, she has obviously had to have quite a difficult fight to get to where she is. If she's the first person to do that, it won't have been easy. But she's kind of like laid the road down, and hopefully now it'll be much more easy for young kids like herself to get into those kinds of positions of power.
Yeah, definitely. It's always about how can you lift up the next generation, right? Even in your position now, when you said that you didn't have any role models, meant that you can still look back behind you and say, well, who else needs a helping hand? How can I support it? And even, you know, Mercedes in general, they do support girls in that area and bring them information about engineering and which courses to study and how to level up to that career eventually. And I think that that's so important, to provide them with that knowledge and information, and role modeling is so important. And I know you do that with them, so it's commendable. So I'm not going to take that as my next question's answer, but I actually wanted to ask, what makes you change the way you step into every day? So reading this book, it's obviously opened up a level of awareness and consciousness to the wider society, but has it changed the way you see the world? I know you talked about being a role model, but has it changed anything else, the way you see it, and what you could change about how you've perceived the world now with this newfound awakening?
Definitely. I think I was probably a bit naive before. Obviously, I have experienced sexism at different points throughout my life up until now. But I think I'd always paid attention to the more obvious forms of sexism, and some of the more subtle and systemic stuff I'd kind of not really been so aware of. And I think this book has made me much more aware of that more subtle and more systemic side of it. And so it's made me question how I behaved. For instance, at work, you know, I'm usually not particularly outspoken. I won't push my ideas, or, you know, if I'm in a meeting, I'm less likely to give my input, because I've always been, you know, like aware of that stereotype of women being like too bossy or too demanding, I don't know, all those stupid things. And so I think it's made me realise, actually, no, I do need to speak up more. I do need to be more pushy and put myself forwards more, because that's what men do. Why can't I do that too? I think I've always wanted to be, I don't know, a bit kind of like quieter and happy to kind of sit on the sidelines a bit. But actually now I'm aware that because there are, you know, like so many other women who struggle even to get into the job that I'm in, I've kind of got to, I don't know, be a good example for them and help kind of show that actually I have every right to be in the job that I am, and there should be more women in the job that I am doing. And so kind of show them what I am like capable of doing. It kind of makes me more driven and want to try harder and do better, because I'm aware I'm not just representing myself, I'm kind of like representing a lot of other women as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of like the main change that I've noticed, just in the last few weeks since reading this book.
I love that. I absolutely love that answer, because I am the same thing. People perceive me as people did perceive me as confident, and I never was. I was such a shy person, and I never really wanted to speak out of turn, or, you know, for fear of looking stupid or saying something wrong or somebody not liking me. You know, fear of not being liked is quite prominent in humans in general, right? But it's like, well, wait a second, since reading this book, I'm exactly the same as you, when I was like, I need to speak up. I need to speak up for women in general. If somebody else speaks out of turn and I don't agree with that, I need to say something and not worry about how they will think or feel. But the purpose is to educate them, and their interpretation of their interpretation in comparison to my interpretation is going to be different. But it's almost like you're educating them to say, well, this is what I feel, and actually it isn't acceptable, or this is my version of how I perceive what you're saying. It may not be that they've even thought about it. They may not even have thought that it's, you know, sexist or racist or whatever it is, but actually it's just bringing to light those actions, and they can just choose whatever they do, because that's within their power, right? So for me, I was on the same line of, let's not speak from the sidelines anymore. Let's be a little bit more confident and speak up, because it's not just for me, it's for society, it's for humanity in general. Like, aren't we trying to create a better way of living for everyone? And if this continues, if people keep speaking out of turn and not being called out on it, then they're not going to learn, right? And they may not learn even if you tell them, but that's their choice.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is the fact that kind of come back to what it says right at the start of the book, in that men are the default. I think men are generally not used to having to consider what it's like for women, and not having to consider people that are different to them and what life is like for them. And so it's brought up a lot of times in the book in different examples. Yeah. As soon as there's a woman involved in any decision-making process, she brings a different perspective and is then able to kind of like change what's actually happening, what decisions get made, because people aren't considering that there are other people with different lives and different points of view, and it's important to consider the whole range of society and not just themselves. And so I think in speaking up in these situations, it's more about kind of opening up people's eyes to the fact that not everyone is like them, and not everyone lives their life in their own way, and what may seem like a harmless throwaway comment to one person can be quite insulting to someone else. And even if you're not saying it with any kind of malice, you don't know what that person's been through up until this point, and so it could actually be a point of like insecurity for them, or sort of triggering for them in some way. And so I think that's kind of like a really important reason for these discussions to happen, is that it opens up people's eyes on the other way of living, other lives, different experiences that people go through. And I think actually one quite common example that I see, like particularly among like my male friends, is that there are certain TV programs where there's a woman that's the main character, and quite often those will also be written by women as well. And I've had male friends say, "Oh, I can't get into that TV program at all. It's all about women, and I just can't like understand it being from her point of view." And it's like, do you realize how many TV programs have a male character as the main character, and women just have to like accept that is like the norm, and that we're able to still empathize with that character. Just because they're a different gender doesn't mean that all of their experiences are completely different to us. But as soon as like there's like a female main character, men are like, "Oh no, that's a woman, I don't know what she's going through," and they're just so like dismissive of it. I don't know.
So are you saying that women have a higher emotional intelligence?
I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it's just what we're used to, and we kind of have to deal with that. I think again with like female comics is another thing, in that like most comedians are male, and they make lots of jokes that men can empathize with in some way. And as women, we've kind of just have to get used to those male comedians and their style of jokes. And then I think particularly more recently, there have been a lot more female comedians become a lot more successful, and they make jokes about their life experiences. And again, I've heard so many men say, "Oh, I don't find her funny at all because I just can't understand the jokes that she's making." And it just kind of shows like a narrow-mindedness of like, well, just because that's not an experience that you've experienced doesn't mean it's not funny. You can't see the funny side of it.
Well, that actually brings me to, I know we've moved on from the book, but actually it's really relevant, because when there's the most recent, well, not the most recent, but a woman rapping about sex, and this had been publicized, and it was like, oh, that's so inappropriate about her sexualizing herself and enjoying sex. And it's like, but wait, haven't male rappers been doing that the whole time? Like sexually explicit words on what they're doing to women, and then as soon as a female does it, it's like, oh, that's inappropriate. And it's like, wait a second, it's the same thing, it's just not being talked about. And that's where I feel like this book has to be read, and that's why I gave it to my brother. I was like, oh, I'm really infuriated with this, and I'm flicking the pages and I'm absolutely loving it. But then I'm like, you need to read this book, because it's not just for every female who needs to read it, it's for every male who needs to read it as well, to bring that level of awareness of what women have been and are going through, because it's ongoing, it's ingrained in our society, and it's just opening ourselves up to that knowledge that, yeah, if you've got this knowledge, you can change your behavior, or you can just become aware of it and then call people out who are being sexist and or maybe are not treating each other fairly. And isn't that the whole point of, you know, Black Lives Matter has highlighted this in society about them not being treated equally, but we still need to support the women and then what they're going through in society as well. So yeah, it's I don't think it's just, I think this book, it just goes to every single industry. And when you realize it's not just the medical profession, it's in teaching, or it's in STEM research and things like that, it's just mind-blowing. And especially, like you said, with society and how women do a lot of unpaid work. It's entrenched, it's ingrained in everything all over the world.
Yeah, I think the issue is a lot of people have who don't experience the sexism or the racism firsthand. They have this idea that sexism or racism or anything else is the very, like, in your face, someone being aggressive, saying unkind things to someone else, or you know, much more kind of like actively discriminating against people. Yeah. Whereas I think what this book highlights is the fact that actually that kind of discrimination is much more subtle. It's in the everyday things that we just accept as the norm, and actually they don't have to be the norm. And those are the kinds of things that people should be questioning. Well, yeah. Why are there these differences in society? How can we kind of reduce them and make things more equal, have, you know, equal opportunities for everyone?
I think you've summed it up really well. But on closing, quick thing, which book would you recommend next on our book club? And then we can put it out to a vote for our audience. Is that all the questions is this one?
I don't know if you've had this already in your book club. Have you read The Midnight Library yet?
No.
Okay, I read that probably a couple of months ago, and it is brilliant, and I fully recommend it.
Okay, well then I'm going to chip in and talk about The Daily Stoic, and I recommend that one next. So let's put it on as a vote, and I'll put it on the Instagram account, and when this will air, obviously I won't do it beforehand and then cheat. But what we'll do is we'll air this, we'll have people listen to it, and then they can vote on Instagram of which one will be next, or maybe we'll have them both and they'll just run one after another. So who knows, we'll see what they say. But thank you so much. Thanks so much for talking to me about your interpretation of the book, and we've had some really good conversations on it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on to do this book club chat. It's been really fun. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.